The Odessia, Semi-Lunar Episode, Introduction to the RATPARC, written by Alexander J.K. Garber. Odessa and Trousers rode in a glass elevator to the top floor of the observation tower at the center of RATPARC, a scientific facility the size of a city. The sun shone brightly over the purpose-built island off the coast of Greater Metropolis and filtered through the giant dome overhead. The expanse below was a matrix of innumerable dome-shaped glass laboratories, separated by dark grey walkways, as orderly as a wall map divided into squares with a 3-foot ruler and coloured markers. An overlay of translucent pipes, like tram lines over a main road, fed into the side of each laboratory, through which flowed pellets and 2 separate streams of water. At the beginning of their ascent, Odessa saw that each laboratory housed a simple garden. Grass, a few flowers, small trees, a pond, and some scattered rocks and logs, in which scurried and scampered a population of rats. In some domes the rats were black, in others white, in others grey, in others brown, and in others they were mixed. On rails attached to the ceiling of each little dome were a few cameras, equipped with microphones that watched over and listened to the rats below. In the elevator with them was Dr. Zirk Nibbles, a jittery little man in a crumpled white lab coat who spoke in an unusually high-pitched voice. His smooth black hair plastered over his head and flicked out across the left side of his forehead like a brushstroke. He had a long thin nose, black eyes, and a whiskery moustache, and an unfortunate overbite. When they had stepped into the elevator, he had hurriedly pressed the button for the observatorium on the top floor and then pressed himself into the corner, watching them unblinkingly and shivering slightly. The heels of his hands, which were very small, were pressed together in front of his collarbone, and his fingertips tap-danced against each other under his chin. Odessa turned to him. "Dr. Nibbles?" Yes," he replied, and cast a glance at Trousers, who had jumped onto the railing next to him. Zirk tried to squish himself even further into the corner of the elevator. "Trousers," Odessa said. "What?" "Just trying to be friendly." "Can't you see he's afraid of you?" "Fine. I'll leave him be," said Trousers. Trousers sauntered along the railing to the other end of the elevator. Odessa turned again to Dr. Nibbles. "Dr. Nibbles, what is this place called?" "Well, we call it RATPARC for short, but its full name is the Reproduction, Amelioration, and Technical Population Advancement Research Center. It's the greatest research facility of its kind, commissioned by the Council of Greater Metropolis, and designed in every detail by Dr. Tetra G. You could say he created this whole universe. And you really are very lucky to meet him in person. I don't know how you got the clearance to get to the island in the first place. No one is allowed here, but, well, if you are here, you must have some very special permission, especially to bring a dreadful Trousers, put your claws away. You're so rude sometimes." Trousers retracted his claws and hopped onto her shoulder, facing away from Zirk. He looked out the window as the elevator continued its ascent. "Top floor, observatorium, finally!" Zirk flew out of the airlock and tapped a few buttons on a control panel, prompting the sliding doors to part, and then scuttled back into the elevator and tapped the closed door button rapidly. "Best of luck. I must be off." As the elevator took him back down to the ground floor, he slumped against the wall. "Whew, that was a close one. Riding all the way to the top with that monstrous cat in here with me. Oh, I can still smell him in here. I can't wait to get back to my desk." Back at the observatorium, Odessa and Trousers strode through the doors onto an elevated platform with bright yellow railing. To either side was a short flight of metal steps. The chamber was wallpapered with digital monitors and loudspeakers. Down below was a large empty space of multicolored floor panels, and every few feet fixed to the wall was a pair of headphones and a controller with a joystick. At the opposite end of the chamber, on a similar platform, a man in a crisp white lab coat sat at a control panel covered with hundreds of buttons, knobs, and dials.
"Welcome,"
said the man.
"You must be the assistant researcher the council has been promising me."
Odessa whispered to Trousers. Did he say assistant researcher? That's what I heard, said Trousers.
Hold the handrail. I'll bring you over,
instructed the man. He tapped a few buttons, and the platform they stood on tracked around the chamber until it came to rest against his. Odessa and Trousers stepped off. The man stood up, and towering over Odessa, enveloped her hand in his.
Welcome. You will be very useful to me, I am sure. I am Dr. Tetragrammaton, or Tetra G for short.
Pleased to meet you, Tetra G. I'm Odessa K.
Very pleased to finally meet you, Dr. Odessa K. Come, take a seat.
Trousers whispered to Odessa. Dr. K, are you now? Fancy that. Shush. It's not my fault he thinks I'm a scientist. Why don't you correct him? I will. Just let me do it in my own time. I rather think Dr. Odessa has a ring to it. She sat in a plush leather office chair next to Tetra G, and he resumed his seat, facing her, his right leg folded across his left knee in the pose of a business executive. He had a long, square face and a strong chin. His blue eyes glittered underneath a pair of bold, angled eyebrows. His thin lips parted in a somber smile to reveal a set of perfectly straight white teeth. He had a ski-slope straight nose that suited his face, and the lines across his forehead added a venerable flourish to his intelligent visage. His hands were large and powerful, his fingers long and nimble. In his chair, he sat tall and relaxed, and regarded Odessa with curiosity and excitement, as if he had been presented a rare, valuable specimen.
I can't say you are exactly what I pictured when the council told me they were reviewing the credentials of an exceptionally insightful research assistant. But as we are learning here at RATPARC, simple appearances can belie deep intelligence.
Odessa found herself blushing under his gaze. He cocked his head slightly to one side as he observed her reaction.
Fascinating. Your reaction suggests you are not accustomed to praise, or at least not to praise in this regard. And yet, as you have been sent to me with the council's endorsement, surely you would be accustomed to favorable descriptions of your intelligence. How does one reconcile this fact with my supposition?
I'm sorry. I think it took me by surprise, and our guide spoke so highly of you, Odessa said.
Of course, I neglected to factor in the attendant pressures of the situation of our meeting. Yes, I dare say first contact carries much greater weight, and therefore makes a deeper impression than otherwise, would it not?
Odessa really did not understand what he was saying, but she tried to follow along. Yes, I think so. That is probably right, she said cautiously.
Interesting.
He mused. Trousers hopped up on Odessa's lap.
And what have we here? A rather fetching specimen of Felis catus domesticus.
Dr. Tetra G picked up Trousers and turned him over in his hands.
Yes, a healthy specimen. Sleek fur, bright eyes, good musculature, perhaps a touch overweight. Quite a bold move to bring in a wild card variable such as a house cat into the RATPARC. But the council did promise me a highly gifted and unusual thinker for a research assistant. So I suppose I ought not to be surprised. There you go, little fellow. Have a shake and a stretch.
I will not shake and stretch on command, thank you very much, retorted Trousers. He put Trousers down on the floor, and in spite of himself, Trousers shook his head vigorously a few times and reflexively stretched his front paws out. How did you know he would do that? Asked Odessa.
Standard feline behavior, readily observable. The most plausible explanation, to my mind, is that it gives the subject a sense of regaining control, a sort of reassuring ritual, to put it in quasi-anthropomorphic terms. Naturally, it is not a testable hypothesis. Animals are incapable of thought and communication such as we understand it, beyond the most primitive, instinctive transfers of information, of course.
Don't you think that's a limited way of thinking about animals? What if they could speak to us? Odessa said. Tetra G laughed.
Oh, what an unorthodox notion. It takes a rare kind of scientific intelligence to dream up such fantastical ideas. Yes, I can see you will keep me on my feet. Mind you, we must not get carried away with such unscientific thinking, but it is nevertheless refreshing, this boldness of yours, some might say impetuosity even. And when we have spent enough time parsing data for the day, I shall be most eager to hear of your other dreamy illogicalities.
He looked directly into her eyes and nodded to himself.
Yes, I think I can see why the council was so confident you would be right for this role. You know, your arrival is especially timely.
Really? Odessa asked with growing excitement.
Certainly. There has been a breakthrough of late in laboratory number 42. The usual story, critical mass, the beginning of population sink, but then, amazingly, the population stabilized, and the rats' health numbers are better than ever. Give me a moment to pull up those numbers.
Trousers hopped up on Odessa's lap and whispered to her. I have no idea what he is talking about, Trousers said. Neither do I, but he thinks I know all about it. Try asking him to brief you on the facility's mission. Do you think that will work? Would you prefer to nod along instead? Asked Trousers. Okay, I get the point, said Odessa. Sorry, Dr. G, I don't mean to be rude, but do you think you could, brief me on the facility's, mission?
Of course. I assumed the council had already given you the full report. But then again, they probably wisely assumed that I ought to be the one to explain to you how it all works here, in order to obviate the possibility of passing on sensitive information to an unsuitable candidate. Yes, the council is indeed wise. Here, I will show you on the holographic display.
He typed on the control panel, and a hologram of the entire dome hovered over the colored floor tiles in the center of the chamber. Dr. Tetra G began.
This is RATPARC, the Reproduction Amelioration and Technical Population Advancement Research Center. The City Council commissioned the creation of our island and the construction of this secret facility. As you saw on the way up, the dome of RATPARC houses 1,764 rat laboratories, in which we cycle through all possible permutations of the famous RATPARC and Rat Utopia experiments of old. It is the largest and most generously funded facility of its kind in history.
Why did the council spend so much money to have this built?
An astute question. It is not common knowledge in Greater Metropolis, but our population has been in decline for the last 23 years, even though all of the citizens' physical and social requirements have been perfectly accounted for through urban and social engineering. You yourself are a graduate of the most refined social system ever to be implemented. Did you know that?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
It just goes to show the skill of its planners that the very citizens of our great city are unaware of the controls around them. Really quite marvelous. It is pure genius.
Didn't you say there is a problem with the population?
Yes. Despite providing optimal conditions and eliminating all disruptive social forces through education and careful management of social conditions, the population of our city is shrinking. The citizens exhibit no signs of distress or discontent, nor are they apathetic in their daily lives. In fact, gym attendance rates are at record levels, and citywide sleep monitor logs have never been healthier. And yet, the total fertility rate is below replacement level.
How can that be?
We truly do not know, and our hope here at RATPARC is to simulate the perfection of the living conditions in Greater Metropolis in rat laboratories, in order to find out what variables need to be adjusted in order to reverse this decline.
Don't you think it's strange to study rats in order to learn about people? Why not just ask the people themselves why they don't want to have children?
I did not realize my assistant would be so bold as to ask questions with obvious answers, but I agree that no stone must be left unturned. The data gathered from such surveys are far too messy to draw any serious conclusions from. It is much better to simulate the conditions with simpler animals. After all, when you abstract human behavior sufficiently, it is close enough to the behavior of other social mammals that we may draw certain inferences from the large repeatable experiments. And in Lab 42, we may have finally found our answer. To date, it has defied explanation, but the numbers are indisputable. As you know, when a rat population in a restricted environment is given unlimited resources, It grows and grows until it hits critical mass, at which point the total fertility rate drops precipitously, and the rat population begins its inexorable decline. The males cease to be interested in mating, and instead spend all their time grooming and sleeping. The females simply do not become pregnant as readily. They produce smaller litters, and they die much more often in childbirth. As the older rats die, they cease to be replaced by the next generation, and even when the population returns to a very comfortable level for the size of its enclosure, the decline continues unabated until complete extinction.
How terrible! Can't you do anything about it?
We have been trying every permutation imaginable, but short of replacing the rats in population sink with new rats, so far there has been nothing we can do once they hit critical population mass. And I'm afraid Greater Metropolis cannot simply replace its citizens with new ones. There aren't any others to replace them with.
What do you mean by replacing them? Couldn't Greater Metropolis attract people from the countryside? Tetra G laughed again.
Oh, that's a funny one. People living in the countryside. Huh! No one has subjected himself to such extra-urban deprivation since agriculture was permanently automated 50 years ago.
The people in the countryside. What became of them? What happened to them? Odessa asked. Dr. Tetra G's mirth faded, and he examined Odessa's face for signs of continuing humor. He asked her slowly,
Do you mean to tell me that you do not know the history of the great urban solution?
Yes, I'm afraid not. Dr. Tetra G's gaze narrowed, and he stared past Odessa as he spoke out loud to himself.
I think I understand. That sort of knowledge is superfluous to requirements, and the Council erased it from the school curricula. The research committee must have reported that such a measure would contribute to overall happiness and well-being. This makes sense. I really must return to Greater Metropolis for an update on social improvement measures. I have evidently fallen behind the latest advances.
He turned his attention back to Odessa.
At any rate, you have arrived at a most exciting time, as you can see here.
The hologram changed into a domed garden filled with rats, and above it hovered an XY graph of a glowing trend line, which rose, then fell, then rose again, and then plateaued. Tetra G continued.
As I said, Lab 42 is special. For some reason that we cannot account for, the population of Lab 42 seems to have arrested the population sink on its own, and now enjoys a stable population with a total fertility rate at perfect replacement level. What's more, these are the healthiest and happiest rats by every measure. I have been watching these rats with their special interest, and, excuse me for such an unscientific notion, it seems that they even interact differently with each other. There is nothing obviously abnormal in their movements, and yet there is something different about them. Perhaps you can help me to construct a testable hypothesis to account for these mysterious data.
Do you mean you want me to help you understand them? Odessa clarified.
Yes, something like that.
Odessa looked at Trousers and scratched behind his ears. I think I can help.